Let's Talk About webinar. In our first webinar on the anniversary of the George Floyd's murder, we talked about race. We listened to colleagues sharing their own experiences. We discussed HFL's actions to tackle racism, stigma, prejudice, and our guest speaker, Dr. Patrick Vernon, explained what has changed in this last year and the impact of structural racism in our society. In these webinars, we want to talk about equalities in the workplace and how we can listen and learn from our diverse residents. We know that silence is complicity, and the refusal to talk about inequalities has helped to keep the system in place. At Homes for Lambeth, we don't shy away from discussion, since we want to push ourselves to listen and learn more about each other's experiences. Pride Month is also about listening and being heard. So today, we want to understand how housing companies can empower LGBT plus residents and how can they be at the heart of our decision making. Thank you. Over to you, Abdi.
Thank you very much, Philippa, and thank you very much for your work on this program. And thank you to our speakers who are attending today. I will do some quick introductions, but before that, if you'd like to ask a question, you can see at the bottom of your screen a Q&A function. So if you put a question in there, we can then put it to a speaker. If you have a specific question towards the speaker, then please do let us know. If not, I will choose which speaker I think is most appropriate to answer that question. This event is being recorded for those who can't attend, and we are live on YouTube. And again, yes, if you do have any questions, just pop them in to the Q&A section at the bottom. Now to introductions. Thank you to all of our speakers for taking the time out of their day to attend this event. Our first speaker is Anna Kerr. Anna is the CEO of Tonic Housing Association, who are creating the UK's first LGBT plus retirement community here in Lambeth. Anna is also the co-chair of House Proud and is on the Housing with Pride steering group, working to actively promote LGBTQ plus residents inclusivity and affirmative action in social housing. Anna is also a member of the London Housing Panel, working with the GLA on policy changes on equality, diversity and inclusion. Anna has worked in the housing sector for over 30 years, and prior to joining Tonic, Anna was Executive Director of UK Co-Housing and an active in the growing community-led housing movement, helping to establish new community-led housing hubs across the country, including London. Our second speaker is Councillor Lucy Caldicott. Lucy is a campaigner and activist working to address issues of inequality, injustice and exclusion. Since May 2018, she has been a councillor representing Stockwell Ward in the London Borough of Lambeth and has recently joined the Cabinet as Joint Lead on Health and Adult Social Care. Between 2019 and 18, Lucy chaired the Children's Services Scrutiny Committee. She ran as Labour's candidate for Dudley South in the 2019 general election. Outside of politics, Lucy has worked in leadership roles at a range of charities over the last 25 years, most recently as the Chief Executive of Uprising, a charity with a range of leadership and employability programs to talented young people from diverse and underrepresented backgrounds. She now runs Change Out, which is a consultancy set up to address issues of diversity, inclusion and cultural change in the social justice sector and beyond. Our third speaker is Jatinder Thakkar. Jatinder is the Chief Executive Officer of Homes for Lambeth and a Company Director of Homes for Lambeth Build and Homes for Lambeth Living Boards. She has a wealth of housing and development experience and joined us from Local Space, where she was Chief Executive Officer for 3 years. Jatinder has a long history of working in partnerships with local authorities, as well as working closely with resident forums to drive up standards and satisfaction levels. She has been a member of the National Housing Federation Regional Committee in the South West and is a member of the Chartered Institute for Housing's London Board. And at Homes for Lambeth, Jatinder is our pioneer for equality, diversity and inclusion. Last but not least is our last speaker, Chris French. Chris has lived and worked in Lambeth for over 10 years and founded Lambeth Links just prior to the first lockdown in 2020. Lambeth Links is the LGBTQ plus forum for the borough, which is home to the largest LGBTQ plus resident population in the UK. The forum acts as a central point for issues affecting the community, now a registered charity, so congratulations, Chris. And the board is made up of a diverse range of people with differing life experiences of being LGBTQ plus. And finally, my name is Abdi Douali. I'm the Senior Comms Manager at Homes for Lambeth, proudly identified LGBT as well. So I will be chairing this event today. So I'll hand over to our first speaker, because I'm sure you don't want to hear me for the rest of the day. And Anna, over to you.
Hello, and thank you very much for inviting me today. It's a real pleasure and privilege to be speaking to a specifically Lambeth audience. So thank you very much for the invitation. I thought, first of all, I would give a little bit of background about Tonic, in case you've not heard about us. We are a very small community-led, not-for-profit housing association, and we're run by and for older LGBT people. We're focused on creating vibrant and inclusive urban LGBT affirming retirement communities. And this is all about creating a space where people can share common experiences, find mutual support, and really enjoy their later life. There are no facilities like this in the UK at the moment, so we're really excited that the first scheme in the UK is going to be launched in Lambeth very soon this summer. By way of background, Tonic was established back in 2014, really to address the issues of loneliness and isolation faced by older LGBT people, and also their specific demand for community housing for them. And just to explain really about why this is needed. There's really two answers to this question, and both of these reflect the historic and sometimes current discrimination that older LGBT people face. We know from the research evidence that in addition to the usual issues of ageing, LGBT people compared to the general population generally have worse health outcomes. They're more likely to live alone, be single, and less likely to have children and family support, something which is really heavily relied upon in our care system and our way that we help people with ageing. We're very reliant on those informal systems. We also know that people are less likely to feel a sense of belonging to their local community and can feel that their specific needs are not considered in their care. The other reason for the demand is very much that people want to live somewhere in their later years that they can feel safe and be with other LGBT people so that they feel part of a community, have conversations and activities based on their kind of shared life experiences. And that can be very different to the general population. We recently did a study back in 2020, and part of it was done during lockdown. And we actually aimed to capture the voice of the demand of older LGBT people. We specifically surveyed LGBT people over 50 who live in London. And we had over 620 responses, which is a phenomenal response to a survey. And what people told us were some three key messages, really: that they wanted housing and care and support services that are safe. Safety is a really key priority. And people explain that as, being defined as actually something that was LGBT affirming or LGBT accredited. In fact, 79% of the respondents said that that was what they wanted for their later life housing choices. And I think the stark opposite of that is that only 1% of people said that they would consider general retirement living. So that was a really clear message. People also, the majority of people, 75%, also really wanted to stay in London, because there's often a myth that when people get older, they want to retire to the seaside, and that was not the case that we were mostly told. People also said they wanted policymakers and providers to recognise their diversity and differences. So this is really moving away from the kind of one size fits all, that because you're older, that's what defines you. And people wanted their diversity to be sort of lived out in their daily experiences. We also found that whilst 25% of the respondents had a disability or health need that required specific housing, only 57% of those actually had no care or support provision at the moment. So moving on then, in terms of what is Tonic? How do you encapsulate what we're trying to do? Well, we are at the moment working with One Housing Group in a partnership arrangement of an existing recently built extra care scheme on Albert Embankment. And what we've done through this partnership initiative is to actually work together so that we will be creating what we call an LGBT affirming retirement community. I think it's quite useful just to explain what that means. So it means that we're not just talking about services and support as being LGBT friendly, but rather that they're genuinely affirming of the lives, histories, needs and desires of LGBT people. And I think it's also really important to explain that that term doesn't imply exclusion of those who don't identify as LGBT. We're not trying to create a kind of ghetto. We're actually just trying to create a safe place where people's histories and lives are celebrated. So it's very much about actively valuing LGBT people in that space. I've got a quote here because I think other people explain this far better than me. So this is from Vito, a 75-year-old who's worked with Tonic. She just said, "I think my ideal circumstances would be to live in a housing scheme that depicts my culture, my values, and values my culture. A lot of people don't understand what that culture is, but I don't have to define it when I'm with other LGBT people because it's just understood." And that's very much what we're about, is creating that space to do that. So in terms of what we're doing at Bank House, we're actually very proud of the fact that in that scheme, we're not just going to be a service provider. Tonic is actually taken a long time to work with the GLA and raise the capital to purchase 19 properties in that scheme. And that's really important to us because what we'll be creating is a community asset in perpetuity. So it means that we're there for the long term. When people come and actually live in the scheme, then they know that we're going to be there. We're going to have staff on site working with One Housing staff. And, you know, if people need to sell their properties and move on, or if they pass away, Tonic will actually manage that property in the long term. So the next sale also gets offered to members of our community. So we think this is a really novel partnership model in housing to be working in, and we hope that we can sort of replicate and develop this in other schemes as well. So I've probably said enough by way of an introduction, and I'll save it for hopefully lots of interesting questions.
Thank you very much, Anna. And it was really good to hear about the work that Tonic are doing. I still remember that day that news came out about the Albert Embankment development, and it just put a smile on everyone's face. So well done to you and the team there. Just going to remind the participants, if you want to submit a question, there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Put your questions in there, and then I'll put them to your speakers at the end of everyone's contribution. Next, I'm going to go to Jatinder Thakkar, the CEO of Homes for Lambeth, who's going to talk about what Homes for Lambeth is exactly doing to make sure that we're meeting the challenge of working in such a diverse borough like Lambeth.
Thank you, Abdi, and welcome everybody. As Chief Executive of HFL, I'm proud to lead an organisation that is supporting Pride Month and encouraging more open conversations about difference. Acknowledging, recognising and promoting difference helps us to champion diversity. This morning I looked at some opposite words for diversity and came across the word stagnation. A lack of diversity would be unhealthy, boring and scary. Not the best words to showcase your business. Diversity instead shouts energy, intelligence and growth, the very essence of success. Pride is a subject of this month's Let's Talk About webinar and is part of HFL's efforts to talk about what are usually classified as sensitive subjects. Pride is literally a time when the LGBTQ community stand up and claim their space with pride at their achievements and resilience. It's also about educating how damaging homophobia is, the need for greater tolerance and the continuing need and push for full equality. Pride helps us move away from stagnation, challenging the status quo and forging ahead with progress. So no real prizes for why HFL is choosing to support Pride and host this webinar. We want to do more than the token gesture of rebranding ourselves in the Pride rainbow colours, as so many companies have done so and are doing. We work in one of the most diverse cities in the world. We work with some of the most diverse communities in the world, and we recognise that we have a responsibility in championing that. In order to provide services that meet the diverse needs of our communities, we need to create an organisation that understands, sounds like, and looks like our communities. This provides us with a greater understanding of the different needs of our communities and gives us a greater chance of successfully meeting those needs. So for us, as a young organisation, the ability to do that starts within our organisation. As a non-Londoner, I am just constantly amazed at the lack of equality I see on a daily basis. And I was truly shocked to learn when I spoke to Anna last year that scheme that Tonic have recently launched in Lambeth is the first of its kind dedicated to older people from the LGBT community in London, a world city. The staff group at HFL felt that same seismic shift last year as many did at the murder of George Floyd. And that led us directly to being more open about areas such as race, sexuality, and mental health. If there's one thing that we have learned this year, it is the need on many levels for organisations to promote difference. Not only is it the right thing to do, but it's also good for business. Remember the word stagnation. Difference promotes a wider way of thinking, and that's what we need in this fast-paced world. And promoting difference is also at the same time about addressing past and current inequalities. At HFL, our Equality, Diversity and Inclusion plan drills down into what it means to be different and how we can learn to value that difference. That means actively promoting difference. We start by collecting data so we know what our diversity stats are. Data is collected at resident, board and staff levels. It's used to inform our recruitment practices to ensure that we're operating to attract as wide a pool of talent as possible, advertising appropriately, applying transparent selection techniques, and watching for unconscious bias creep. Once recruited, we provide support, whether mentoring or buddying, to promote a better learning environment and the encouragement to succeed. Professional memberships are encouraged to foster positive networks. Staff development comes in the form of training and also open discussion. Some of our staff meetings have been dedicated to single issues, and we're acutely aware in these meetings of what a diverse group we are. We won't hide from diversity, so diversity does not need to hide from us. That's also pertinent in how we recognise that promoting diversity is important in normalising difference. Our collateral, such as resident reports and corporate plans, reflect our communities, and we are publicly pledging our support for diversity in the workplace by signing up for membership to various networks, including Houseproud, Race at Work, Housing Diversity Network, and others. This public pledging is a sign both internally and externally that we are an open and inclusive organisation welcoming diversity and the benefits it brings to our business. Our values are of partnership, commitment and respect. To firmly establish a positive, inclusive and productive culture, we will embed appropriate behaviours with specific training for staff in the coming year. We've just been talking about it this morning. These behaviours will stem from our inclusive approach and strengthen our culture of recognising and valuing diversity. We're a very young organisation, and as personally as a glass half full type, I'm going to take that as a positive. We carry no baggage as an organisation. We may have staff who have certain views, but to thrive in our business, you will, ironically, have to fit in. That means no bigots, no preformed ideas, and no closed minds. To be part of HFL, you will need to be as welcoming of others as we are of you. Pride Month is 1 month in 12 when we can all show solidarity with the LGBTQ+ community. But it is in our everyday lives and attitudes where we can make equality a reality. Just like Black History Month, I would love to be in a world where we don't need a special month to celebrate. But until then, let's enjoy this special time. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jacinda. And it's great to hear about what the work that we're doing at Homes for Lambeth and to hear about your dedication as CEO of the company. I'm now going to go to Chris French from Lambeth Links to talk about some of the great work that they're doing in the borough.
Thanks so much, Abdi. It's great to be here, especially this month, and really great to be with some fantastic speakers as well. You know, home is massively important, and you know what that means to individuals. We often talk about spectrums in LGBTQ+ circles, and there are a great number of different sort of outcomes for people. And what we try to do at Lambeth Links is be that connection to our community. As Abdi mentioned in the introduction, we have the highest resident population of LGBTQ+ people in the UK. That was a stat from the ONS from some research done in 2016. And we're hoping that the census, which was recently undertaken for the first time this year, including people's responses to questions about sexual orientation, will back that up as well. Will continue to show us is that. And it's great that Lambeth is, sort of a trailblazer in that sense. And, having Tonic Housing's development on our doorstep, on our footprint, is really fantastic to see. And for me and Lambeth Links, I really want Lambeth as a borough, as a place, to be the vanguard when it comes to LGBTQ+ outcomes for people from that part of our community. So it's really fantastic to be part of this and to see what's actually happening. Mentioning Tonic again and thinking about the specific offer that Tonic provide is for people who are older of the LGBTQ+ community. Lambeth Links, we are very intersectional. Our board is made up of a number of diverse people. So I myself, I'm chair and the BAME representative. We have an older person's representative and a younger person's representative as well, and a trans representative too. And I mention those specifically in the context of housing, because I think it's quite telling. If you think about homelessness, then 24% of young people who are homeless identify as being LGBTQ, and a lot of the numbers from that would say that the reason they're homeless is because of not being accepted in their own home, and that means that they're made homeless by essentially their family. So there's a great need across the board when it comes to home. Home is something that should emote feelings of safety and belonging and being protected essentially, and that's just not the case for so many across our community. So for things such as being safe and warm, which is a right of everybody, it's really something that Lambeth Links hold dear and will campaign on. Essentially, when we first launched in February of this year, when we were made a charity, which was in LGBT History Month. So, we're quite blessed that will always be our anniversary, actually, of becoming a registered charity. A lot of work did happen before that point. But one of our focuses on a launch event that we had was specifically around housing, and with it being LGBT History Month, there was a big focus on what had happened in Lambeth, in Brixton specifically. Think of Railton Road and the squats that were there and the community centres that were created at that point. It's a really great kind of story, and it just goes to show the sort of where we have come from, where we need to go, and where we need to get to as well. So I think that there's a lot to do, and there's a lot that we want to be able to help with, and I think a big part of that is actually reaching out to the community and finding out what their needs are. As Anna mentioned, the survey that was undertaken for Tonic gave a wealth of information, but we would like to do that for as many of our community as possible. Certainly for people with disabilities, for example, who are part of the LGBTQ+ community, people of colour, and also trans people who should be able to feel safe in their own homes and have that sense of community around them. And there's also, talking about spectrums again of people's accessibility to housing and what that means for certain individuals. So, those who are able or in a position to buy their own property, but those actually who are renting, from either social landlords or private landlords, there's a whole area of different needs across that. So, Lambeth as an authority is a very large social landlord. It has a number of properties, and people who are within those properties being able to feel safe and making sure that they've got the protections, if somebody's coming around to fix something in their property, that they don't need to go back into the closet, as it were, hide photos that show who their partner is or certain things they may have, that's really important, that people don't feel the need to have to change their home where they are for the sake of somebody else. So there's so much to do. As Homes for Lambeth, we're a new organisation as well. We're finding our feet. We're volunteers, but I think we're very much punching above our weight, and it's allowed us to make some fantastic connections. I mean, being part of this forum, for example, it's just absolutely brilliant that we're able to share our experiences of what we're doing and what we want to do in the future as well. So for me, I think it's really about having safe spaces for people, being able to be who they are, their whole selves, in the place where they live. But thinking about it across the arcs, across the lifetime of an individual, and from being young through to retirement and through to end of life as well. That's something that we shouldn't shy away from in talking about. If people need to go into care homes, for example, and again, that notion of having to go back into the closet because somebody who is from our community finding themselves in a very heteronormative, let's say, kind of care setting. So there are a number of areas that as Lambeth Links we want to discuss, to talk openly about, and also to be guided on, because we need to hear what's happening, and we've got experts around us always. So we're always willing to hear and learn. I think first and foremost, it's from the people who are experiencing these issues that we need to hear from, to see how we can make things better. And as I say, Lambeth, I think, needs to be the vanguard. It needs to be the absolute trailblazer for all of these areas, because we have the ability to do so. We have the ability to create amazing spaces for all of our community. So really very much looking forward to working with all on this call, and happy to take any questions as well. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Chris. And it's really great to hear about the work that Lambeth Links are doing. I can imagine a lot of your time goes into it just as a volunteer. So thank you for all the work you're doing, and congratulations on reaching that charity status. It's really great news.
Thank you.
Next, I'm going to invite Councillor Lucy Caldicott to speak. Just put you on. There we go. Lucy, over to you.
Thanks very much, Abdi, and thanks everybody for your interesting speeches. Really pleased to be here, and I've been asked to talk a bit about sort of equalities and health, and about the council's role in those areas. So equality is a core thread that basically runs through everything that the council does, and knowing that the borough has such a large percentage of LGBTQ plus residents is something that really informs our decision making, and it's a hugely important area of our work, and specifically in healthcare as much as anywhere. And every decision is reviewed through an equalities impact lens. So there's an equalities impact assessment committee that sits and reviews big decisions, and anyone can look at all of those papers. They're published on the council's website if you're interested. Once you start looking at the council's website, you do end up losing a bit of time. So my portfolio on the cabinet covers health and adult social care. And so the health system, so that the way the council works with all the different parts of the health system, be that the local hospitals, pharmacies, GPs, so working as a network with other boroughs, so we sit alongside other boroughs in the area. Obviously, public health is an area that the council delivers on and has been very busy through this time of COVID. We also work on mental health. And then the other big area, which is often not so prominent in the public eye, is adult social care. And that is a huge part of what the council does. And we're supporting some of the most vulnerable people in our borough. So the elderly and those with disabilities and other care needs. So talking specifically about housing, I think housing and health are completely interlinked. And as a councillor, I think I probably haven't done the stats, but I would estimate that most of my casework is about housing issues, and I probably get the most complex casework from people needing support with housing. I'm just thinking about somebody that I'm supporting at the moment, so a young mother with 3 children, one of whom has physical disabilities, and she's sadly at the moment in temporary accommodation up 2 flights of stairs. So you can only kind of imagine what that must be like for her, and she is pretty desperately trying to access a permanent, appropriate, safe place to live, and it really is heartbreaking, because I know that the solution for that maybe isn't going to be quick. But it's great to see the progress that Homes for Lambeth is making, and having a social landlord in the borough, which completely aimed at increasing the provision of kind of high quality and energy efficient homes for people like the constituents I'm supporting is something that's really exciting. As others have said, home should be a place where you can completely be yourself. And I think for social landlords, one of the things I was reflecting on is that, you know, for those of us in the LGBTQ plus community, thinking about what it's like when you have to pretend to not be yourself in your own home. So thinking back to times in my past where I've had to hide photos or books, or pretending to have separate bedrooms, that sort of thing. And I think those of us who are LGBTQ plus will very much sort of think, recognize those feelings. And so I guess if you're in a social, if you've got a social landlord and you might have a housing officer visiting you or somebody from the council, having to think about those things, I think it's really great that housing providers are signing up to the House Proud pledge, and really hopefully remove it, training their staff so that those anxieties can be removed from their residents. I think another thing is about needing to feel confident that if you do have a safety concern, that will be heard and dealt with effectively. And so whilst home is a place where you absolutely have to feel safe to be yourself, on the street it's not always the case, and doesn't always feel safe that you can express yourself or express your love for your partner, and many of us will have experienced difficult times on the streets. And so feeling confident that if we do report incidents of harassment, that will be supported. And I think that equally is, that's about the police obviously out on the streets, but for big social landlords too, in their estates, what's happening there. And of course, Lambeth as a borough, we have strong relationships with the local police, and we employ community safety teams, and so we will be advocating on behalf of communities, and that is absolutely key. I also wanted to draw attention to some of the other areas that Lambeth Council is supporting. So Pride in Practice, which ensures that LGBTQ+ people have access to inclusive healthcare. So whether that's your dentist, whether that's your GP, whether that's your pharmacist, that people that are signing up to those guidelines, you should feel safe going into those places to access healthcare, even from the receptionist. And then Clinic Q, which I'm really proud to announce that we've continued to fund, which is a clinic, a trans-led, safe, confidential space at King's College Hospital, which provides holistic sexual health and well-being and healthcare and mental health care for trans people and their partners at King's College Hospital. So that's something that I'm very proud to confirm that we're continuing to fund. And just to close, just a couple of thoughts as we emerge from COVID. This is the second Pride month that we're not celebrating together, and that's hard. We're distanced from our friends, we're distanced from our families, but it's really good to be able to sort of be part of this group here today and just sort of share solidarity across different intersections and really work together to kind of support each other through these times. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Lucy, and thank you for your contribution. It's great to hear the initiatives the council's taking to support local charities. And yeah, thank you for all your great work, and congratulations on joining the Cabinet. Okay, well, I've got one question in the Q&A box, and I will ask one as well. So I think this one's a bit more directed at maybe Anna, but Paige asks, how do you foresee developments coming forward, specifically for the LGBT+ community? Obviously, there's the first scheme that Tonic are doing. Are we going to, I'm sure we're going to see more and more, but Anna, you might want to give us a sneak peek into that.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to start the ball rolling on this one. Absolutely. So Tonic is in the process of applying to be a registered social landlord. The first homes at Bank House is a mixture of rented accommodation and shared ownership. Tonic will be providing just the shared ownership because we're not yet a registered provider. But we hope for future schemes that we'll be able to provide a range of affordable accommodation, because we know from the information, the people that are contacting us, that is what people need. So there are different needs out there. And very much we do want to do more development. So we see this really a bit of a kind of a snowball, because we've spent a lot of time trying to explain to people why it's needed and what it looks like. And I think when actually people can see what it looks like, can physically see what LGBT affirming means, what it's like in terms of that community, then I think people go, right, okay, yeah, that makes sense. So now we're going to hopefully open the opportunities for future developments. We'd love to do more in Lambeth if that's where the demand is. We certainly, it's been a great place to work, and I think it's there's a huge number of people there, but also it's got the diversity of the community and also a really supportive community. But likewise, we would also consider doing other schemes in different parts of London and actually different cities in the UK too. And we're also really connected with other LGBT community housing providers. So we actually created a manifesto for the mayoral election, working with AKT and Stonewall Housing and the Outside Project. So this is sort of multi-generational. So from youth homelessness right through, I shouldn't forget Micro Rainbow, also working on LGBT refugee issues. So, and they provide housing and support for refugees. So that we actually realised that we've got so much in common on this platform, and by working together we had got a much stronger voice in terms of what needs to change in a policy context to actually enable the provision. So we can kind of demonstrate the need, but it's actually the changes to demonstrate that provision. And I think the opportunities, you know, we're really pleased at the profile that Tonics had, because hopefully we can build on the back of that to actually support provision in other ways, that we focused on older people's provision, but equally that we're linked to, you know, things like the Outside Project that are direct access homelessness provision. They've also just started set up a refuge as well. So it starts that dialogue in terms of the provision, and maybe brings in how other housing providers to start working in partnership with these community-led organisations, because it's really difficult getting things off the ground when you're completely new. So hopefully that's a good place for the future.
Great news. I've got a question for Chris. Obviously, Homes for Lambeth is a Lambeth-based organisation, and in Pride Month, some say it's a celebration, some say it's a protest. I always like to think it's both. How can organisations do more in Lambeth, specifically working with organisations like Lambeth Links, to provide not just support, but to understand the needs of the LGBT community, and in a meaningful way, as opposed to, you know, kind of changing your logo to a rainbow colour in June and then kind of doing it the next year after, and not actually kind of, what kind of material things can organisations do? Sorry, because I put you on the spotlight there.
No, that's absolutely fine. It's a great question. Thank you. And yeah, this is a debate within the community, I think, every year, you know, in terms of, you know, rainbow washing, as it's called, you know, and how we can prevent that sort of, you know, Coca-Cola changing a logo, not to name, you know, specific organization, but there are many big multinationals that do the same sort of thing, but just changing that logo, you know, to show rainbow without anything actually behind it. I think that there needs to be a lot more in terms of knowing what they do internally, I think. So networks, I work for quite a large firm myself, and, you know, they have a network which is called Shine. And, you know, that does do a lot for the people inside the organization. So I think a lot of people don't necessarily recognize what might be happening within the organization itself. So, you know, that network allows people to be who they are at work, and it gives an outlet as well. But I think in terms of material things specifically, I think schemes such as, you know, and I know Homes for Lambeth do this in terms of apprenticeships, actually getting people, you know, targeting specifically from the LGBTQ+ community to work for organizations, to be a part of it. And especially with, you know, organizations such as H4L, which are doing this, you know, which are building communities essentially, you know, those members from that community who have the greatest need to be a part of that, to actually, you know, build something and be a part of that, be a link to it, I think it is certainly a place to go. There are some, you know, large employers within Lambeth as well that could do the same sort of thing. It's not just about you know, specifically housing, but people becoming skilled. LGBTQ+ people sometimes find it harder to get a job and to keep a job as well. For example, if somebody's transitioning in the workplace, you know, it's a difficult period of time for them. So for employers to be more welcoming and, you know, to be a place where people want to work and feel safe to work as well. So I think rather than just, you know, sort of painting a rainbow over your logo, well, actually, why not employ some people from the community, get them into your organization, their experiences, and, you know, help that way. I think that would be the best way for organizations to help.
Brilliant. And to get in touch with Lambeth Links if they're doing stuff in Lambeth, obviously.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We've had another question. I'll let Lucy, I'll come to you for this one. And it's specifically around future support for the LGBT community and what the Homes for Lambeth as a council does in terms of allocations of properties and are there any other schemes that we're seeing coming along? And what else is the council doing, I guess, to support the LGBT plus community this month?
Can't think of other things this month. I was thinking about LGBTQ History Month, which was in February, which is when I think Lambeth Links, when we launched, wasn't it, Chris? And we did a whole big range of different events. So we did events aimed at all sorts of ages. And because it was during lockdown time, a lot of the events, well, all of the events were online, but we were able to reach a really wide range of people. So there were events aimed at young people, and it was with the support of the libraries. And I often remember one of my cabinet colleagues, Sonia Winifred, who has the portfolio of equalities and culture and is a librarian by background. And she tells a brilliant story of in the 80s, during the time of Section 28, when it was illegal to be sort of promoting, in inverted commas, LGBTQ issues in schools. And she and her colleagues in the libraries would often be putting gay literature or lesbian literature out on display and then sort of moving it around if it got moved, and so she was kind of doing this sort of guerrilla tactic back in the 80s, which is really good. And now she's got the portfolio of libraries and culture and equalities, and so she's an absolute stalwart ally, supporting us and making sure that LGBTQ History Month is a really big feature of the calendar. So that was something I was thinking about that was just a few months ago.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. Jacinda, I'll come to you as well, just on that, in terms of what Homes for Lambeth does in terms of, obviously, allocations sits with Lambeth Council specifically, but is there anything else that Homes for Lambeth is doing in terms of tangible support for LGBT plus residents on our estate?
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about how as an organisation we're trying to make ourselves community ready. So to be able to serve the communities in the best way we can, we need to understand people's needs. We're quite data driven, so we need to collect more data. It's about making these networks as well. So I only met Chris last year from Lambeth Links, but I've known Anna for 25 years. So Anna and I have a shared development history. So I'm just, as I said, I'm shocked to learn about Bankhouse being the first scheme of its kind for the community. But we've worked together, and I'd like to think that Homes for Lambeth as a housing provider could be part of the next scheme, and that we could certainly have something in our portfolio that helps Tonic and parts of the LGBTQ community. But we do need data, we do need to make links across. Lambeth Links is a charity. The other thing that people can do, rather than just paint their logos with a rainbow, is to pledge financial support. So that's the other thing. It's really about just making this a lot more open. This is why we do these Let's Talk About webinars. We just want to get the messaging out as openly as possible, and making those networks, we are going to be greater than the sum of our parts. So I'm hoping this time next year when we do this is going to be a much bigger webinar, and that we start getting those pledges of support. And we as Homes for Lambeth, as Councillor Just is saying, we can hopefully provide something more tangible as well, and say to Lambeth Council, where can we build the next Bankhouse?
Excellent, thank you very much. There's one question from Sarah, and this is, how can we be better allies to our LGBTQ plus neighbours? Short answers only, but I'll go around. I'll start with Chris. I'll start with you.
Thank you. Another great question. I would speak to people. If you know somebody who is LGBTQ plus, ask them for a coffee, or hang out over Zoom or whatever, and just talk. Listen to people's experiences and share your own experiences as well. Just be curious. I think a lot of people aren't offended when you're asking questions. Rather than sort of making guesses and assumptions behind people's backs, just directly talk to people, have a conversation, get to know somebody.
Excellent answer, thank you. Lucy?
Yes, I think the same. I think really listening and being open to people, to difference. you know, and sometimes being open to difference means being a bit uncomfortable because you learn about things that you didn't know before, and sometimes that's a bit like, oh gosh, I didn't know that, but that's okay, that's great, you know. The more that we can learn from each other and not feel, you know, kind of almost push. I always talk about pushing through the awkward. So if we can push through the awkward and get to the other side, that would be really good.
Excellent. Anna, you have to answer that question as well.
Somebody very wise once taught me if actually all we need is for people not to stand in the way. So often the work that we do is really hard because we're always facing barriers after barriers after barriers, and it is quite exhausting. So the best allies that I would say would be those that kind of stand aside and are not those barriers, and allow, you know, the people of the community to have a voice and for that voice to be heard. And if you've got, you know, Tonic, you know, I mentioned at the start, is community led. Its founders are people who with lived experience, who directly felt that discrimination and had that, you know, direct experiences of it, and that's why they formed Tonic, to actually do something about it, because it wasn't being picked up in the mainstream. But it has been a very long, kind of hard road to get to this point. So I would say, you know, absolutely support allies, jump on board with it, but we do need at best people not to stand in the way, and even better than that, when you actually get supporters and helpers. I mean, you know, Jatinder's been a great supporter and helper, just in terms of, you know, a new housing organisation setting up and comparing notes. That sort of thing is hugely helpful, because then you're not so isolated and you get there a bit quicker because you learn from others. So yeah, perfect example of an ally. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Jatinder, I've got a question for you in terms of what's next for Homes for Lambeth. Where do you go now? We've had the event, we've talked about it. What's next in terms of actions?
Well, as I said, I'm a non-Londoner. And one of the things that surprises me about London is how, in some respects, it's quite stagnant. I do find that really strange. So I'd love to be part of a network that we're creating here that kind of just starts spreading across London. Let's just start doing things in a different way. Let's shatter some of these myths that are around there. I'm not afraid to talk about things. It's time to just sort of shine the spotlight in some of these areas and just say, come on, this isn't actually good enough. You know, you didn't ask me the question about what I would do for neighbours, LGBTQ neighbours. I'd like to just say, let's just start normalising it all. One good way is to start to see yourself as a different one to begin with, before you sort of point the finger at anybody else. So some wise person once told me, Anna, that when you point the finger, there's actually that many pointing back at yourself. So we just need to think about, we just need to come into the 21st century. Come on, people. We've had the most god-awful year. This is a time when surely we have got a common enemy. We don't need to have these social constructs making enemies of each other. We need to just put those down. So yeah, let's just grow up. And it's deeply, deeply unfashionable as well. So it's time to move on.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jacinda. And one last question for everybody from me is, what's your takeaway from this Pride Month? What's the one thing, if you could take away from this month, that you'll take away for the rest of the year? Lucy, do you want to go first?
I think what I've taken away from Pride Month and COVID is the need to sort of join the dots, and sort of building a bit on what Jatinder was saying, you know, that so many of these issues are sort of interlinked. You know, we face similar barriers, and the more we can kind of find ways to join together and get over the barriers together. And we've seen that a lot through COVID. We've seen people sort of coalesce around issues and just get stuff done. And I think if we can carry on being like that, and I think that's as much about Pride Month as it is about COVID, it's you know, that what unites us, you know, really bringing that together.
Excellent. Anna, I'll go to you next.
Difficult to top that one because that kind of really sums it all up, doesn't it? I mean, it does feel very strange, you know, for something where pride is about being out, and ironically, most of us are kind of stuck in at the moment, and it doesn't quite have that same feel to it, which is both the kind of protest and celebration angle of it, is about being out with that. So, you know, we're doing this in the best we can. Pride gives us, or Pride Month gives us a platform to speak where these things may not normally be covered the rest of the year. I'm not saying that all the time, because we do get coverage in other parts of the year, but we do get called upon to speak at lots of different events at the moment. And I do actually really welcome that, because quite often we are talking to audiences who may not have heard, you know, these stories before. And, you know, if we can help be part of that change, because it's all about you know, people learning, maybe thinking differently, then I think that's really good. So, you know, I'll take from this that, you know, we may be limited about what pride can be to us right now, but if it can do those little differences of change, then that's great.
Excellent. Chris, I'll go to you next.
Thank you. I echo what people have said, as you know, you probably expect being the last one to answer, but I think for me, reflection actually. So, given, you know, it's been a quieter Pride Month than many, you know, and it just gives that ability to actually take on board what is important, what's been going on, and, you know, the space to actually really properly reflect on it and think, okay, what does this look like next year? Does it need to be, you know, an even bigger event than it was, you know, sort of 2 years ago because there was nothing done this year? Or is it that actually let's be in that more reflective mode again and see, you know, where are we against ourselves from this point this year? And just being able to take that time and that space to think about things a little differently, take more time to make, you know, these fantastic connections and have these good and important conversations, and just use a bit of that sort of, you know, quieter time period in which to do that, I think.
Brilliant. And last but not least, Jatinder.
What will I take away? I think I'll take away, because of COVID, literally building on what Lucy was saying, see how iterative this is all becoming, but the sameness, the solidarity from the sameness, you know, when inequality hits, often has the same impact. And in that, we should be taking something out of it, and just realizing in our sameness, that's where we are stronger. So let's stop looking at difference. Let's start looking at similarities.
Excellent answer. Thank you very much to all of you for all of your brilliant contributions, and for the members of the public who have watched this event. As I said, this is live on YouTube as well, and we'll be distributing it to other colleagues that couldn't make it today. But thank you very much for attending, for answering the questions so brilliantly, and I'm sure I'll catch up with you all very soon.
Thank you, Abdi. Thanks, everybody.
Pleasure.